How did you hear about Otlet? Was it so obvious to study this personality, and why?
One question, that's several. I first heard about him when I was a student at the University of New South Wales, and my professor was interested in the universal decimal classification, and I examined it in relation to the theories of Leibniz about a universal characteristic. And I became interested in this man Otlet, and I began to, when I went to the University of Chicago sometime later, I thought I would like to find out much more about him, who he was and what lay behind the universal decimal classification, and I became aware that there are all sorts of questions that one could ask about him, his life, his work, that nobody had ever looked at. And so I came to Brussels to see if I could find any material that would be relevant to answering these questions for my doctoral thesis. And I found the Mundaneum. The Mundaneum as it was at the time Otlet died. It had been
the Park Leopold?
It had been moved to the Park Leopold, and one of the rooms was Otlet's office, which had been left undisturbed since he died. So this was in the 1967-68 that I did this.
What do you hope to discover in these documents in the Park Leopold?
Well, I wanted to find out what his work was, what his ideas were, what happened to him and to them, and so I used the archives that were there. These are now been rediscovered and are available here in the current Mundaneum as the dossier numéroté, but there are all sorts of other material in this very strange building that I found.
So you became the biographer,
yes,
of Paul Otlet during the 60s.
Yes, the book that came out of my doctoral thesis wasn't published until 1975, I think it was. But there had been no comprehensive study of Otlet at all until then.
How could you explain why he forgotten? Why Otlet was forgotten? So
I think he was obsessive about certain ideas. First of all, he was quite famous until the First World War. Very well known, very respected, consulted, reported in the newspapers and so on. But after the war, he became obsessed with the idea of the Cité Mondiale, a universal network of documentation, a whole new way of looking at the world of knowledge. And people couldn't understand this. And as I say, he was fairly obsessive and repetitive in talking about it and writing about it. And I think he slowly disappeared from people's consciousness, all but a few. Even in the 60s, young people who had been les amis du Palais Mondial were now very old amis du Palais Mondial and were still meeting to celebrate Otlet. But in the scholarly and wider world, what he'd done was forgotten. And the reason for that is, one of the reasons certainly, is that his thinking was so far ahead of his time. People thought this was all absurd. How could we possibly...
he was a pioneer, if we can say.
He was certainly a pioneer.
When was it possible to establish a link with his innovative character and our time?
It only became possible when the internet and the services the digital world started to emerge. The information society, the digital world. And I remember thinking, when they were first connecting me to a computer and, the internet was coming along, this seems familiar. And it was a world with a new technology, the functions of which Otlet had been thinking about and trying to implement in his own environment long before we had a digital
When did you write something about this conclusion for the first time?
I think
and for who?
I think None of this was in my book because, of course, that was too soon. I think it was in the early 1990s. Well, was it?
Yeah, yes.
I honestly don't remember.
It was what you said before. Yes, it's normally correct.
Yes, I wrote articles for the Journal of the American Society for Information Science, and pointing out that things like hypertext and the internet and so on were things that, in his own way, Otlet had been thinking about. But what has made it more interesting as time has gone on, and we've got Google and we've got Wikipedia and all of that, these were his ideas about creating a new kind of encyclopedia and how to get into documents and to have universal access to them. The way we do it is quite different, but the functionality, the ideas we were still discovering the relationships with Otlet. Yeah.
With the Mundaneum, for example.
The Mundaneum is a fascinating attempt to create what I would call a scholar's workstation, and in it he shows the kinds of auditory, visual, museum-like functions that we now can summon up visually on a computer. But the Mundaneum shows microfilm, which he was a pioneer in developing as early as 1906, gramophone records, telephone, the beginning of television, and there is a screen for television. So as soon as these developments began to emerge, he began to speculate how they could all be brought together into what he called substitutes for the book, or a new form of the book.
Or the universal book.
Or indeed the universal book.
My last question is, what kind of research do you want to engage if you were to start your search today?
Well, I have started my search today again. I tell people I'm rewriting my doctoral thesis. In fact, what I want to do is to go back and put Otlet into the social, political and intellectual context of his time in order to bring out more fully what happened to him and why we should be interested in him. But there are continuing aspects of his work that I think are neglected, that have to do with international organization, the creation of new kinds of international institutions, as well as reorganizing the way in which we approach the world of knowledge. So that the information society, what does it require, what are its infrastructures and so on. I think we can begin to see them emerging out of the extraordinary events that surrounded Otlet in his day, including...
So we could learn more about Otlet now with this research that you are doing now?
I think so. Well, I hope so. I mean, changes in the present always allow us to look at the past in a different way, and as we look at the past we begin to interpret the present in a different way. So I'm hoping that this new biographical study will be different from what I wrote before, will complement the work of Françoise Lavie, whose biography is such an important recent publication related to Otlet.
Or the actual work of Wouter van Acker, would you say?
Wouter's work is offering us a new perspective on some of the ideas, especially the urbanistic ideas of Otlet. There's the work of Charles van den Heuvel on looking at the way in which Otlet was attempting to visualize new relationships in knowledge organization. And he's recently found some fascinating documents in the archives of the Mundaneum.
Including today.